I'll start with the low reverse servo and the 1-2 accumulator. So just lube literally everything up on here. Alright, I think I may have mentioned this in part 1, but I guess I can mention it again. These servo pins are selectable as well. So you'll notice that this one has 2 lands in it. You know, that's how you can identify the different lengths. And I apologize, I don't have them memorized in terms of what they are versus the number of lands. I know with the 4L60s, you know, it has the same kind of convention, and the ones that are not marked are the longest ones, and that may be true of the 80s as well, but I'll annotate the video. The point I'm attempting to make here rather clumsily is that unless you're making wholesale changes to either this assembly or to the case or to the front planet, in other words, you have to machine like 15 thousandths, 20 thousandths off of it to, you know, get rid of some really bad wear marks or burn marks or whatever, chances are you won't need to do any kind of measurement or any kind of you know, extensive checking here. It's just, you know, there's a lot of freedom, you know, degrees of freedom, if you will, margin for error when working with these. Let me lube this up a little more. So don't think that you have to spend a lot of money for fancy tools. CK Performance put out some literature on how to actually check for this real, you know, quick and effectively. And it, you know, applies to TH400s and any year 4L80E. So I'll link that in the description so that you have it. But I mean, I'm confident this will be fine. We're going to air check it. I mean, if it doesn't air check, or if when we install it and the output shaft binds, then, you know, we know we have a problem. But short of those 2 scenarios happening, I think we're fine. What would help is if I found the gasket. So the gasket has a sealing side, and that's this side here. It's, you know, kind of, you know, protrudes. That you want face down. It's going to take 6 10mm bolts, and they all get 18 foot-pounds of torque, just like the pump. If you want to run these down with like a 1/4-inch drive impact, you know, nothing that has any real torque, that's fine. You can use a speed wrench or just a regular ratchet and socket. And I mean, I guess it kind of goes without saying, but during your teardown and inspection, you should inspect all your threads. You know, just give them a decent, you know, glance, each one throughout the case. You know, pump the case here, pan bolts, valve body bolts, anywhere else where there's a, you know, threaded location, just to get ahead of any problems you might have during reassembly. So you just kind of go gradually and collapse it until it's fully seated. And periodically you'll see me stop because I'm trying to check the camera angle. I mean, I still really haven't gotten down this whole, you know, cameraman slash performer or, you know, builder or whatever, doing it at the same time. It's still a little awkward. And I've been doing this now YouTube thing for about a year. Actually, no, more like a year and a half. Time flies. But I'm still trying to really find my groove, so to speak, with respect to this stuff. I suppose this metal gasket is another potential area of redundancy for you. You know, if you wanted to grab an extra one just in case, you can do that. Hey, so this feels about right, like, you know, there's no unusual drag or whatever. Okay, the test port for this is right here in this location. And I'll take a picture of it and, you know, put it in the video so you can see what it looks like. But I'm going to put air right here, and all I'm going to really do is watch down in here. I mean, there's almost no area where you could see it, but just it's a little, you know, slice of visibility to the rear band, and I want to watch it apply on that forward planet. So if it's applying, you'll see the output shaft move a little bit. See that? And all that air is because this nozzle is like leaking air real bad. Okay, so it's applying, it's grabbing the drum like it should. Otherwise it's spinning nice and free, so we're done with the low reverse servo. Now I will make mention, they changed the design of this servo. This is a late model. The early models were flat, and the pins, you know, the lengths of the pins materially changed as well, and that also holds true for this servo. Again, I will need to annotate to correct myself if need be, but I believe in 2001 they widened the intermediate band and lengthened the length of the pin significantly by 200 thousandths of an inch or so, and you can retro this combination back to any year, 4L80E or TH400, but you got to do it as a service pack. You can't either just retro the band by itself, or for whatever reason, just retro the pin. I guess you would want to do that if something happened to your pin, and I mean, I can't imagine what that could be. Maybe I lost it, but just know that they can retro, but they have to go as a matched set, aka service pack. All right, it's time for some check balls. Sonics provides 8 Torlon check balls in the Sure Cure kit. I don't know where my knife went. Come here. Now you're going to install all the check balls on a normal factory build, or a slightly modified build, or any build in which you're using a shift kit that calls for all of the check balls to be installed. So that would be here, 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 and here. You're not going to put anything here. So let me run through that again. I know I think I counted one twice. Here, 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 here. Now, if you're running a block-off plate for the 3-4 accumulator, okay, that stack that normally gets bolted to the valve body, that's these two accumulators, or these two check balls right here. Okay, you do not need to add a check ball there or there if you're running a block-off plate, and that's what we're doing. The other option is if you want to leave the reverse check ball out, because you're concerned that there might be a slight delayed engagement in reverse due to the fact that you are dual feeding the high clutch. You could do that too. In fact, I'm actually going to do that. I'm just going to leave that check ball out. So I'm only installing 5 check balls. Now, if he tells me that reverse is too robust, you know, it's throwing him back in his seat or whatever, or, you know, it's not comfortable, then we'll go ahead and reinstall that check ball. And I want to get this thing out of my way because it's bothering me. Okay, so the hook, I have it facing this way. In fact, here, I'll do it again. I'll show you. So it faces this way. All right, let me get my case gasket. So you notice here, this overhangs this flange here by a pretty wide margin. I'm gonna cut that off with scissors, but on the early models, they had a feed pipe that came from in this location here, all the way back, you know, to the rear of the valve body area in the case. After 97, that completely changed. So we just have a small feed pipe location here in the case, and it'll go in this area in the valve body. All right, now I'm fishing through my test plate drawer so I can find the 480E test plate. And it's not going to sit perfectly flush until I bolt it down because of that intermediate servos in the way. So I'm a big fan of these plates, and if you're a subscriber to my channel and you've watched, you know, other rebuilds that I have on there, you'll know that, like, with pretty much every one of these transmissions that has a you know, set of worm tracks on the belly, I always install a test plate to validate clutch apply. The exception to that would be the 4R100. I don't have a test plate for that, but it's not necessary. All the clutches for the 4R100 are readily accessible without the need to use a plate. And once I'm done this, I'm going to put the parking linkage in, and then we'll move to the valve body and spacer plate, and I'll talk about feed hole sizes relative to your setup, assuming it's not stock. If it's stock, I mean, you could drill out the feed holes maybe by 5 thousandths to 7 thousandths each. If you do nothing else with the transmission, and that should firm up the shifts so that they're not sloppy like they, you know, like that you may feel them to be. And that's assuming you do nothing else, like you don't install any shift kits or you know, do any kind of dual feeding or whatever. I get most of these test kits, or excuse me, these test plates off of eBay. And this particular one came from a eBay seller called Trans Tools. Okay, when we're done with this, I'm going to take this plate off. I got to actually take the gasket back off, and then we're going to install that little cup plug, and then I'm going to torque both of those feed bolts to spec. But they're tight enough that it's not going to make a difference with respect to, you know, interfering with my ability to get good apply. All right, now I'll proceed with our air check. So here's our overdrive. This is forwards, coast clutch. Then we have our direct, our intermediate, and our high reverse, and then our low reverse. Here we have band servo apply for the intermediate band and release. And then this is also another port dedicated to band apply. Now let's start with the forwards. Okay, again, the noise you're hearing is just air escaping the nozzle. The nozzle's kind of messed up, but what I'm looking for is firm, consistent apply and release. Okay, do intermediates. And the reality of it is with this test plate, you're really only using it for, in my opinion anyway, these three. These three apply circuits: forward, fourth gear, and coast clutch. You've already checked these, with the case upright, so it's just more or less academic at this point. And same with the low reverse. We've already checked that. There's technically not a hole here in the gasket where the the test plate has you put air, so I'm not even going to bother. Okay, there's band apply. Sorry about the screeching. And then coast clutch. And then for your overdrive, alright, looks like this thing wants to come off. Okay, it's plenty healthy. And like I said, we tested that as well. So, do you need a test plate for the 4LEDE? Probably not. All right, let me get all this stuff off, and then we'll pick up where we're gonna install the little cup plug for the high reverse, blocking that off, and then we'll kind of proceed to everything else, torquing the two bolts and the valve body and finishing this thing up. Okay, I'm gonna clip this gasket right over there. And here's the plate. Okay, that's where the plate goes. As you can see, there's nothing there. And then the valve body goes more or less right on top of it. So you just have like a flap hanging there. They made that gasket applicable to both early and late models, so I mean, if you don't want to clip it off, that's fine too. Doesn't matter. Alright, so intermediate feed bolt for the center support gets 32 foot-pounds. And as mentioned, it's a 3/8 12 point. This is a snap-on the hell does this say? GSF121. And the other one gets, I believe, 12 foot-pounds. But let me double check that, and then we'll take care of it. Foot-pounds it is. Torque's 40. And if I haven't mentioned it already, if you're going to use a Transgo shift kit, they're going to have a bolt in here, or in that kit for this location. Whatever you do, do not use that bolt. I've stripped a couple of them out before I finally learned my lesson. And I mean, you know, there were situations where I needed to go back in the case because I screwed something up, or, you know, for whatever reason. To be honest with you, I can't remember the exact circumstances. I think one of them was because I had to, you know, mess around with the shims to try to get in play, just like with this transmission. But the factory bolt is more than sufficient. One will come in your paper and rubber kit. If for whatever reason it does not, simply reuse the bolt that was in there already, unless it's like stripped out or something, which, you know, I've seen a couple of them partially stripped. But if you strip out the Transgo bolt, it's going to be a pain to get it out. What I ended up doing was taking a Dremel with a tiny little wheel, and I cut a slit right in here, and I was able to take it out with an impact driver on one case. The other case, when I was cutting the slit, it worked its way out on its own. But either way, it was like touch and go for a little bit there. Okay, let's do the cup plug. So here is the 3/8 cup plug. These are readily available, you know, pretty much anywhere online. Just get a punch that's sized for it. And then I'll put Loctite on it, just to be sure. Guys will use check balls to, you know, kind of drop them down in the center support, but that's not a method I favor, simply because it's 100% permanent. I mean, I don't really know of a way to, you know, get the check ball out of there. I mean, maybe there is a way. Maybe I just simply aren't up to speed on those kinds of things. But anyway, you're gonna tap this down until it hits the center support, until you can go no more. And I'll take a quick picture of it so you see what it looks like when it's, you know, seated to depth. And I'll put that in the video so you can see it. Alright, gasket back on. And next, I'll install the parking linkage, get that done, and then we will get to the valve body, the 3/4 accumulator block off plate, and I'll talk about you know, feed hole sizes relative to application, converter stall, rear gears, and desired shift firmness. And I'll give like general advice and guidelines, because shift feel is very subjective. And applications vary widely, so, you know, not everyone is going to have the same definition of, you know, what is the right level of firmness, if you will. So I'll give some like tips and pointers and things to consider, and then you can make a decision on how you want to drill your feed plate or your spacer plate based on your particular setup. So all right, let me clean up the bench a little bit and then we'll proceed. Before I do the parking linkage, I'm going to install the wiring harness just to get it out of the way, and so that I can avoid having to fight the parking pole rod to get the harness in. So plenty of lube on the O-ring, and then you're going to put the flat side facing up. Let me lube up the board a little bit as well, make it easier on the O-ring. Just more or less dangle it out of the way, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna have to move it around anyway. Alright, so for your parking linkage, make sure that you have your little retainer. This basically looks like a splined nail. And those things can be a real pain, especially on disassembly when you're trying to remove it from the case. A couple of times, unfortunately, I've had them break off, and that's really my error. Not being careful with it. So just something to be mindful of. So for the linkage itself, the rod is going to go like this, relative to the case. And you're going to have your two locking tabs here. You're going to situate the rooster comb with the engagement stud for the manual valve facing the case, and you want the comb in between these two little tabs. Then you're going to grab your little castellated nut. Just put it on. And zoom in just a little bit. And you know what, let me take this out real quick, just so it's crystal clear. When you put your retaining rod in, you want the rod to engage like this in the groove. All right, and that'll hold it in. Let's just zoom back out. Okay, you just want to get it started, make sure that it's actually in that little groove. Okay, and that's it. And I'll just lightly tap on it to fully seat it. You don't want it loose. and then 15 millimeters on this castellated nut. And you really want to cinch it tight. Alright, now we're going to go and put our guide plate in for the parking hole. Two 13 millimeter bolts. And you want the top portion of the so-called chair. If you look at it, it looks almost like a car seat. You want the headrest, if you will, pointing toward the front of the transmission. Situated in there. Make sure that your parking pole's underneath and that it's moving free under spring tension. And then of course put your rod underneath, otherwise it wouldn't do much good. And then go ahead and install your bolts. There is a torque spec for this. Oops, sorry about that. There is a torque spec for this. Offhand, I don't know what it is. I'll annotate the video, but I typically just torque them or tighten them rather until they're really snug. Alright, that should be good. They're not going to come loose. Okay, I'm going to reposition the camera and then we'll talk about the valve body and the spacer plate. Okay, let's talk spacer plate. Specifically calibrating shift firmness via sizing your feed orifices based on your application, your converter stall, and how you like to have the transmission feel when it's shifting. So I'll run through the example here for this transmission, and then this should give you an idea of what you should do based on the different factors and considerations that we'll discuss. So application is street strip. It's going to see the track, from time to time, not all the time, just maybe once a month or so. Otherwise, it'll be driven part-time on the street. It's not the owner's primary vehicle. So the vehicle in question is an 04 Sonoma. I don't know, they weigh what they weigh, but the converter stall speed is going to be 3,200 or somewhere thereabouts, and the final drive ratio is going to be 410. So with that in mind, we want to size the feed ports as appropriate for that type of high intensity application. Now for 480Es, the one other factor you want to consider and take into account is accumulation for the third and the fourth shift, so 2-3 and 3-4. In this case, we're running a block-off plate. We're not going to have accumulators active here. So we would normally drill the hole sizes to, X extent based on all the other factors, but we're going to reduce that because we're not going to have any softening effect of the accumulators because they're just simply not going to be there. So here's how I sized these feed holes to start. 1-2, I'm going to size it at 100 thousandths. We have our clearance set at 87 thousandths in that clutch pack. If that pack was on the tight side, I'd maybe go 105 thousandths. If it was on the real loose side, I'd maybe go 93 or 95 thousandths. 2-3, we're going to go 100 thousandths. It's going to be dually fed. The entire apply surface for that piston is going to be used. And then for 3-4, we're going to go 93 thousandths. And again, for your overdrive, it is not super critical, for racing. at least in a 4L80E, because you shouldn't be racing in regular, drive. You should never shift into fourth gear in a quarter mile, pass, because at that point, as you're approaching the finish line, your RPMs are going to drop, and the engine's got to kind of start over again when it comes to staying in the power band. So when you're kind of getting ready to go, approaching the starting line, you do a burnout, you're going to be in manual low, and you're going to upshift, and then you're going to stop at drive 3. So your 1-2 and your 2-3, and then you're going to finish the race in direct. So with that all said, if we were running live accumulators, which for a race situation I would never recommend, but let's just say you're more street than strip, I would increase the orifice size here from the 2.3 and the 3.4 by about another 10 to 15 thousandths or so, given the rest of the factors or rest of the parameters. Now, if you were running a real high stall converter, like something like 5,000, and this was going to be a dedicated race vehicle, then all of these hole sizes would be markedly larger than they are here. And in the case of the direct, and I didn't mention this when I was talking about check balls, but you would leave the number 8 check ball for direct out of the case. And at that point, it almost doesn't matter what you drill the feed size to, because the direct check ball acts as a orifice feed restrictor, and it allows for kind of a metered flow of applied fluid to that direct clutch, and also allows for much more efficient exhaust when you shift out a third. So, downshifting into second, for example. So anyway, that's feed hole sizes. So let me reposition the camera. We can go back to the bench and we'll set up the block off plate. Okay, so here's the block off plate. It's from CK Performance. It takes the place of the 3.4 accumulator housing. And here are the 6 bolts that come with it. And I should say accumulator housing. There's a 2.3 and a 3.4 to be technical. But anyway, it installs over top the spacer plate. And I'm not 100% sure if it uses a gasket or not. I can't remember the last time I used it, but I'm going to just put a gasket on there. It's not going to hurt. So these bolts, like all the bolts bolting the valve body to the case, get anywhere from between 95 and 100 inch-pounds. So I'm going to put a little bit of lube. Line up your gasket, all the little bolt holes. Just do the best you can to get everything centered. Okay, and then there's the hole sizes for the plate and their respective locations. And then I just wrote a little reminder, this is the top and then that faces the edge. my knowledge, there's no specific tightening sequence for this, but I tend to follow this kind of pattern, you know, in then out with pretty much anything. So when you see me bolt on the valve body, I'll more or less do the same. But again, even for the valve body, bolting it to the case, to my knowledge, there's no specific tightening sequence. Most transmissions don't have one. There's a couple that do, but for all the GM transmissions that I work on, there is no specific tightening sequence. That's like, you know, 4L80s, 4L60s, TH400s, 700R4s, you know, and the like. All right, I think we're ready to bolt this thing to the case, so let's do that. All right, grab your valve body, extend your manual valve, and then just drop it onto the case, making sure that you engage the manual valve with the stud on the rooster cone. Then from there, line up your bolt holes. And then you can drop your pressure switch manifold assembly in place. 6 8mm bolts. And then just get them threaded part way. Okay, next, we'll do our bolt for our wire loom. That's going to go right here. And then you want to make sure you install this bolt, because once we cinch these down, we're going to actually torque this whole roll of bolts first, so that when we go to install the final bolts that hold down the little feed pipe in the rear, this bolt is already torqued. Otherwise, you won't be able to get to it. And we got 2 bolts for our detent roller. And once you got all the bolts situated, we can start zipping them down. As I was saying, no particular order. I mean, I just like to go middle and then work my way around, and that's, you know, just out of habit. As far as I know, there is no specific torque sequence that the factory service manual or automatic transmission group manual has you follow. All right, so now I'm going to connect everything up. So I'll route my short loom inside the longer loom. And then for this connector here, this side, kind of the rounded side, faces up, whereas this side faces down. And this is for shift solenoid B. And then you just want to make sure that you route your harness underneath your feed pipe. And this side that says PED, this faces up. Okay, you just want to make sure that there's no tension, especially around here. You don't want this, these two wires or this section of wire coming into hard contact with the edge of the valve body. So, make sure there's some slack there. And then otherwise you can just connect your loom. All right, now start torquing all your bolts up. Again, we're leaving that last bolt out for the feed pipe. And again, just out of habit, I'll swap over to the 8mm and do the pressure switch manifold bolts. Okay, time for the feed pipe. Okay, just double check everything. Make sure everything's good to go. All your connectors are plugged into their respective solenoids or case pressure switch. Everything looks good. Now just grab your filter and lube up the pickup tube and stick it on in. Okay, this kit came with the reusable style gasket, so we can use it as often as we need to, just throughout the life of the transmission. As long as it doesn't get damaged somehow, it should be fine. Make sure you have a magnet in the pan. This pan's a little banged up, so I'm gonna advise customer to install a deep pan before he actually fills this with fluid, but he may or may not do that, so I'm gonna put all the bolts in and torque them as if we were gonna run with this pan. Ideally, if you're doing any kind of high intensity or high performance, heavy duty application, etc., you want to run a deep aluminum pan if you can. The more fluid capacity that you're able to provide for the transmission, all things equal, the cooler it'll run. The three things that really kill transmissions are heat, RPM, and lack of maintenance. I mean, you could kind of say lack of maintenance and abuse, but as one kind of catch-all heading. But assuming you take care of the unit, you service it when you need to, for 4L80Es, for just daily driving or work within the scope of the design limits that GM engineers had designed into this thing, then changing fluid once every 36,000 is fine. If you're doing a lot of towing, a lot of heavy hauling, beyond the factory specified ratings or what you would normally expect, maybe it's a work truck, maybe it's in and out of traffic all the time, you want to shorten your service cycles to maybe 24 or even 18,000 miles between fluid and filter changes. All right, these are all 10 millimeter, and there's 17 of them. Hey, pan bolts, I like to do 98-inch pounds on the majority of transmissions I build, unless the factory calls for something dramatically different, and there are some that do. But when in doubt, anywhere from 98 to 110 foot-pounds is going to be fine for making sure that you don't have leaks. And whatever you do, do not use RTV on a transmission pan unless it's specifically called for, by the factory service manual or TransStar, or excuse me, what do you call it, ATSG, Automatic Transmission Service Group Manual, ATRA, whatever. As long as there's some official literature about using RTV, then go ahead and use it, but absent that, do not. If you use too much RTV, some of that stuff will kind of break off and then eventually circulate around inside the unit. I mean, as you saw with the valve body and, you know, everything off of it, there are plenty of voids that would allow for exchange of material to migrate from the pan elsewhere inside the unit. And if a little bit of RTV gets into a lube passage and blocks it off, then you might have a major failure in the unit. That's the last thing you want. Alright, quarter line fittings. The rear fitting is longer, has the snout or the extended feed tube, and takes an O-ring. The front one does not. So these take a 3/4 socket and receive 28 pounds of torque. Okay, next we have our shift cable bracket that goes over top the case connector. And that's a Torx 40. And I'll have to look up the torque spec on this. Alright, I can't immediately find it, so I'm just going to cinch in good and tight and then torque it later once I figure out what the spec is. If there is one, if I can find one. If I do, I'll annotate the video. If I can't, then, and you don't see an annotation, just assume I was good with cinching it up. Okay, don't forget your little extension tube for the vent hole. If you overfill the transmission, fluid will come out of here. And it'll vent until there's, you know, an adequate level of fluid. While it's not good to overfill it, it's much preferable to accidentally overfill a transmission than it is to underfill it, especially if you underfill it by anywhere from, like, you know, 2 to 4 quarts. If you underfill it so much that, like, there's simply no line pressure able to be delivered to the applied elements at all, then there's no risk of you burning them up. You just won't go anywhere. But if you have not enough fluid and you don't realize it, and you know, take off and you try to drive the thing like normal, or you really get on it, you could burn up, you know, one or more clutch packs because there's just simply not enough fluid in there for that circuit to achieve full line pressure. All right, I gotta do some touch-up paint on this, but this thing's more or less done. So I'm gonna get it off the stand and then we'll summarize the build. Okay, 480's all done. Here on the bench, ready to go back into the vehicle. It's going to be using a street strip application. As mentioned, 04 Sonoma is putting out about 600 horsepower, and it's going to see the track at least some of the time, you know, occasionally, maybe once a month on average. So overall, the build went well. little bit of a touch and go with respect to the front end play, you know, required a few iterations to get it right, but ultimately we got there. And that's par for the course. Anytime you're working with a transmission, especially the 4L80, it can be a little finicky when it comes to getting that in play dialed in exactly where you want it. And that's especially true if you're swapping out parts or adding different parts, like for example the billet forward hub, or rollarizing the output shaft. And those are all the correct things to do in this application at these power levels. Beyond that, we dually fed the direct clutch internally, which is always the best way to go if you have the transmission out on the bench. TH400s, 4L80Es, TH350s, and even 204Rs. It's best to dual feed the direct clutch inside the transmission versus through a shift kit. Now, if your trans is healthy, it's in the vehicle, and you don't have the time or I guess the necessary expertise or tooling to take it out and overhaul it yourself. Things like the Transgo HD2 shift kit or similar kits from other other suppliers are just as well. So don't be afraid to use them. The one thing about the Transgo is just watch the sandwich plate. You want to make sure you torque everything up to spec so that you minimize any kind of likelihood of cross leaks and things like that. And that applies to a few of their shift kits made for different transmissions. But all in all, I think this will be a good unit. We may have to go back inside of it and either upgrade some additional parts if the owner decides to increase the power output or boost in his vehicle to north of 750, 800, those kind of power levels. We want to incorporate a billet input shaft and possibly a super drum, but we'll see. Anyway, I know it was a long series, a lot of information. I tried to keep it as concise as I could and give you the information that I think you need to know, and at the same time make it reasonably enjoyable to watch. So if you have any questions, comments, any feedback, if there's any specific topic or subject matter or aspect about building the 4L80E that you'd like me to get into more deeply, please go ahead and leave that below so that I can make a video when I have the earliest opportunity to do so. And as always, thanks so much for your time. I hope you're having a great day and look forward to seeing you on the next video.